Good morning again, and let's see, we're moving on to part 7. Now come we to Karlsefni's expedition to Vinland, and the first winter passed at Straumsfjordur, which I'm sure you're very eager to hear about, and this is kind of a long one. During this time much talk took place at Brattahlid about making ready to go to Vinland the Good, and it was asserted that they would there find good choice lands. The discourse came to such conclusion that Karlsefni and Snorri prepared their ship, with the intention of seeking Vinland during the summer. Bjarni and Thorhall ventured on the same expedition, with their ship and the retinue which had accompanied them. There was a man named Thorvald. He marries Freydis, the natural daughter of Erik the Red. He set out with them likewise, and also Thorvald, a son of Erik. There was a man called Thorvald. He was a son-in-law of Erik the Red. Thorhall was called the Sportsman. He had for a long time been Erik's companion in hunting and fishing expeditions during the summers, and many things had been committed to his keeping. Thorhall was a big man, dark and of gaunt appearance, rather advanced in years, overbearing in temper, of melancholy mood, silent at times, underhand in his dealings, and withal given to abuse, and always inclined towards the worst. I can tell we're going to like him already. He had kept himself aloof from the true faith when he came to Greenland. Oh, we're supposed to dislike him because he's a pagan, I see. He was but little encompassed with the love of friends, but yet Erik had long held conversation with him. He went in the ship with Thorvald and his man, because he was widely acquainted with the unpeopled districts. They had the ship which Thorbjorn had brought to Greenland, and they had ventured on expedition with Karlsefni and others. And most of them in the ship were Greenlanders. There were 160 men in their ships. They sailed away from land, and then to the Vestibirg, and to Barneyar, the Bear Islands. Thence they sailed away from Barneyar with northerly winds. They were out to sea 2.5 days. Then they came to land, and rowing along it in boats, and explored it, and found there flat stones, many and so great that 2 men might well lie on them stretched out on their backs with heel to heel. Polar foxes were there in abundance. This land they gave name to, and called it Helluland, Stone Land. Then they sailed with northerly winds 2.5 days, or 2 half days, and there was then land before them, and on it a great forest and many wild beasts. The land lay in the southeast off the land, or an island lay in the southeast off the land, and they found bears thereon, and called the island Bjarni, Bear Island. But the mainland, where the forest was, they called Markland, or Forest Land. There, when 2 half days were past, they saw land and sailed under it. There was a cape, to which they came. They cruised along the land, leaving it on the starboard side. There was a harborless coastland, and long sandy strands. They went to the land in boats, and found the keel of a ship, and the place, and called the place Kjalarnes, or Kielness. They gave also name to the strands, calling them Furdestrander, or Wondershore, because it was tedious to sail by them. Then the coast became indented with creeks, and they directed their ships along the creeks. Now before this, when Leif was with King Olaf Tryggvason, and the king had requested him to preach Christianity in Greenland, he gave him 2 Scotch people, a man called Haki and a woman called Heikja. The king requested Leif to have recourse to these people if ever he should want fleetness, because they were swifter than wild beasts. Erik and Leif had got these people to go with Karlsefni. Now, when they had sailed by Furdestrander, they put the Scotch people on land, and requested them to run into the southern regions, seeking for choice land, and to come back after 3 half-days were past. They were dressed in such wise that they had on garments which they called beafal. It was made with a hood at the top, open at the sides without sleeves, and was fastened between the legs. A button and loop held it together there, and elsewhere they were without clothing. Then did they cast anchors from the ships, and lay there to wait for them. And when 3 days were expired, the Scotch people leapt down from the land, and one of them had in his hand a bunch of grapes, and the other an ear of wild wheat. They said to Karlsefni that they considered they had found good and choice land. Then they received them into their ship, and proceeded on their journey to where the shore was cut by a firth. They directed the ships into the firth. There was an island lying out in front of the firth, and there were great currents around the island, which they called Stromasay, or Stream Island. There were so many birds on it that scarcely was it possible to put one's feet down for the eggs. They continued their course up the firth, which they called Stromsfjordur, and carried their cargo ashore from the ships, and there they prepared to stay. They had with them cattle of all kinds, and for themselves they sought out the produce of the land thereabout. There were mountains, and the place was fair to look upon. They gave no heed to anything except to explore the land, and they found large pastures. They remained there during the winter, which happened to be a hard one, with no work doing, and they were badly off for food, and the fishing failed. Then they went out to the island, hoping that something might be got there from fishing, or from what was drifted ashore. In the spot there was little, however, to be got for food, but their cattle found good sustenance. After that they called upon God, praying that he would send them some little store of meat, but their prayer was not so soon granted as they were eager that it should be. Thorhall disappeared from sight, and they went to seek him, and sought for 3 half-days continuously. On the 4th half-day, Karlsefni and Bjarni found him on the peak of a crag. He lay with his face to the sky, with both eyes and mouth and nostrils wide open, clawing and pinching himself, and reciting something. They asked why he had come there. He replied that it was of no importance, begged them not to wonder thereat. As for himself, he had lived so long they needed not to take any account of him. They begged him to go home with them, and so he did. A little while after, a whale was driven ashore, and the men crowded around it, and cut it up, and still they knew not what kind of whale it was. Even Karlsefni recognized it not, though he had great knowledge of whales. It was cooked by the cook-boys, and they ate thereof, though bad effects came upon all from it afterwards. Oh, you wouldn't want to eat a bad whale, I guess. Then began Thorhall, and said, "Has it not been that the Redbeard has proved a better friend than your Christ? This was my gift for the poetry which I composed about Thor, my patron. Seldom has he failed me. Now when the men knew that, none of them would eat of it, and they threw it down from the rocks, and turned with their supplications to God's mercy. Then was granted them the opportunity of fishing, and after that there was no lack of food that spring. They went back again from the island, within Stromsfjordur, and obtained food from both sides, and from hunting on the mainland, and from gathering eggs, and from fishing on the side of the sea." And that is the end of part 7.